Hello there, I'm Simon Rafe and welcome to Brown Bag Bible Study, the Bible study that you can do in your lunch break. Now this is an introduction to Scripture, which will give you some information that you might not have known, and it'll encourage you to read the Bible. But most importantly, it's presented in little bite-sized pieces which are perfect to fit in with our busy lifestyles. Every week, I'll be concentrating on a small part of Scripture, either one of the 73 books of the Bible or a group of related books, and I'll be bringing you interesting facts and information to help you understand it. I'll also be including links to further reading, articles, books, and so forth, which will help you learn to love sacred Scripture even more. This week, an introduction to the Deuterocanon of the Bible, the 7 books and parts of 2 others, which Protestants call the Apocrypha. 5 of these are historical books, and so this introduction is here in the historical books section. Over the next 5 weeks, I'm going to look at each of these 5 books, and with the other books following later on. But this week, I want to discuss the Deuterocanon as a whole. Now, what binds the Deuterocanon together is not style or content, but rather the simple fact these books are the Deuterocanon. Deuterocanon means second canon, meaning that they were added later to the scriptures. These were the last books of the Old Testament to be written. The Protestants call them the Apocrypha, which means of uncertain provenance, and they reject them as sacred scripture. Catholics, together with the Orthodox and other groups of Christians, accept them as sacred scripture. And, most importantly, so did Jesus Christ and the apostles and the early church. They have been part of the Bible from the very beginning of the process of canonization. And that is what I want to talk about today, the inclusion of these books in the canon of the Bible. This is a major point of difference between Catholics and Protestants, and you should be ready to defend the Catholic point of view. First, some history. During his conquests of the Middle East in the 4th century BC, Alexander of Macedon established a great center of learning, the city of Alexandria by Egypt. In the chaos following his deaths, one of his generals, and, if the rumours are true, his illegitimate half-brother Ptolemy, became pharaoh of Egypt. Ptolemy's son, Ptolemy II, was pharaoh after him, and he commissioned a translation of the Hebrew scriptures into Greek to be included in the Library of Alexandria. This translation was the Septuagint, and it rapidly became the version of the Hebrew scriptures used by the vast majority of the Jews. It was the Greek Septuagint which was used by the Jews of Jesus' time. In fact, when the New Testament quotes from the Old Testament, the vast number of quotations are from the Greek Septuagint. This shows the Septuagint was considered to be the canon of the Hebrew scriptures by many Jews, but, most importantly, was regarded as such by the early Christians. The most important thing about this? The Septuagint included these extra 7 books and parts of 2 others. These books were written in Greek and not Hebrew following the Babylonian exile and the scattering of the Jewish people. After Jesus Christ ascended to heaven, the church began its great mission of evangelization. This is the period covered by the book of Acts and the letters of St. Paul. In 70 AD, the Roman general Titus and the 10th Legion laid siege to Jerusalem and destroyed the temple. The priesthood was killed and the rabbis fled the city, eventually settling in the town of Jamnia, where they formed a school of Jewish thought. Around 100 AD, these rabbis decided to come up with a list of accepted scriptures because they were finding themselves under intellectual and theological assault from Christianity. They wanted to make a list of scriptures which were acceptable to Jews who denied Christ was the Messiah. So they excluded all the books of what we call the New Testament and selectively chose from what we call the Old Testament. They rejected the Greek Septuagint and went with the books just written in Hebrew. So, now there are 2 lists of Old Testament scriptures, the ones used by Christians and the ones used by Jews who reject Jesus Christ. The list used by Christians includes the 7 Deuterocanonical books, and the Jewish list does not. The Catholic Church then starts formally assembling the Bible, gathering the books together, translating them first into Latin and then into other languages, copying them, publishing them, and so forth. This goes on for hundreds of years until the early 1500s, when a German monk called Martin Luther comes on the scene. Luther led a revolt against the church, known today by the misleading title of the Reformation. He rejected the priesthood and the sacraments and came up with a unique and silly theology not supported by the Bible called sola fide and sola scriptura. Now, you can learn more about just why these ideas are wrong in the Apologetics series, but for now it's enough to say that Luther wanted to cut books out of the Bible. Remember, the Bible had been settled and published for about 1100 years by this point. He wanted to remove the 7 Deuterocanonical books, the parts of 2 others, as well as cutting out the Epistle of James and the book of Revelation from the New Testament. Luther was eventually persuaded to leave the New Testament alone, but he cut down the Old Testament based on his own views, and that is why Protestant Bibles are incomplete. Today, Protestants will try to justify this action by a number of different arguments. They will say the books were added by Catholics at the Council of Trent. This is just a flat lie, as you can find if you read the documents of the Council. The Council documents don't give a list of books, but rather say the Bible consists of the books in the Latin Vulgate, a book which was 1,000 years old at the time. All Bibles published before the 1500s included all 73 books, and the scenes and stories are referenced in art and literature of the period. Sometimes Protestants will say the missing books are incorrect because they teach the wrong theology, by which they mean they teach theology they don't agree with. Now, this is just supreme arrogance. What gives anyone the right to cut books out of the Bible because they say something that they don't agree with? If we could do that, what meaning does the Bible really have? Why couldn't someone cut out the parts about loving your enemies, for example? Protestants will also argue that the rabbis at Jamnia cut the books out, and this is another silly argument. The Jews also cut out the New Testament, so should we cut that out too? When deciding what are in the Christian scriptures, we don't follow the guidelines of a group which explicitly rejected Christ. Now, when you defend the presence of these books, and you will have to, you should focus on the irrefutable evidence that these books were part of all Bibles for 1,000 years or more. Any argument they are not part of the Bible has to address this, and there is simply no good argument for cutting bits out of the Bible. Now, the additional reading has a lot more information about this, and I strongly recommend taking a look at Where Did the Bible Come From series, as well as my basic training course on biblical context, in order to better understand the Deuterocanon. Next week, we're going to be looking at the first book of the Deuterocanon, the book of Tobit. Until then, I'm Simon Rafe, and God bless. To learn more about the place of Scripture in the lives of Catholic Christians, I urge you to read Pope Benedict's Apostolic Exhortation Verbum Domini. The Pope encourages all Catholics to read, learn, and love Scripture, and to understand its relation to the Church. A link to this exhortation is included in the reading materials for every episode of Brown Bag Bible Study. Just click the link over there.